All right, welcome back to Module 3. What we'll be talking about here is submittals exclusively. So the first two modules were a lot broader topics. Obviously, we talked about a lot of different things, a lot of different categories all throughout here. A little bit less specifically guided, just kind of gives you the broad perspective of, you know, a lot of different project requirements and processes that are necessary when you're starting off in the industry specifically. When we get into submittals, though, this is now going to be a lot more specific. Same thing with Module 4 when we get into logistics, and Module 5. We're going to have kind of some major processes that we're going to be going through. So I'll let you go through a lot of this information on your own, obviously, like the submittal resources, transmittal resources. But I will walk you through the practice activities in this video, and then I'll have my own video for the assignments, or a separate video, I should say, for the assignments, and then the discussion post that goes along with your assignment. So I'm just going to walk you through this PowerPoint here just for a little bit. Not going to go through every single piece of it, but really hammer on the purpose of submittals and why they're here. So I'm just going to walk through a few of the different things. Basically, what we're looking at with submittals, if you haven't seen or done them before, is they're really a big checks and balances process to make sure that whatever we are putting in our building is exactly what the engineer requires or the architect requires. And a lot of it, I mean, it seems kind of straightforward because it's in the spec, but a lot of times the way that the specs are created or the requirements that are listed are not always necessarily feasible or able to be performed exactly the way they're written, especially when you get to things like MEP systems. A lot of times they're taking a lot of performance requirements or different design requirements, and you're trying to combine multiple different things to make something work exactly the way it says on paper. So it's not an exact science with how your submittal process actually works, or with how implementing the actual product into a project actually works. But it's a major quality control tool, and it's a major step for your contractor and subcontractor to make sure we're doing the right thing, and meeting all the requirements. So like I mentioned briefly there, the specs are pretty much created based on specific requirements for installed products. Oftentimes, it's a certain product that the engineer or architect is basing your product on, or your spec section on, but it's not necessarily that way. The other piece of it too is we're often dealing with multiple manufacturers for a specific product. So what that indicates is that whatever company's listed has been pre-approved, their product has been pre-approved, and that leaves it open for the subcontractors or the contractors to be able to shop around a bit to see what they can get for the best price that will meet the spec book. So leaves the competition market a bit open by having what we consider an open spec book with multiple manufacturers listed. Let's see, just a couple examples of when you see, like, specifically this one has carpet tile, has a specific manufacturer that's listed, there's no substitutions permitted, so that's what we call a closed submittal. I'll get into more of like the actual specifics and legal jargon in a different class. The one down below here, a lot of times when you see with different components for MEP systems, so there's a fan section here that shows different requirements for the fan, what the fan motor has to require, which jumps you back to a different section in your spec. So obviously not everything lines up exactly. So if you have different units like Carrier, Aeon, and York, and Train and stuff, they all have a little bit different product. So they're trying to meet all the requirements that are based in the spec. You'll find submittal information in multiple different locations within your spec. Obviously, in general requirements, like we just learned about in 01, that will explain general submittal requirements, the general processes, procedures, right? What all your coordination involved is, when your timeframes are, as far as when you have to submit things, how many days you have for review for different parties, right? And a lot of times we'll be specifying to who all these things are going to, and what the chain of communication is. Within your technical specs, then, in your divisions 2 through 50, or if you're still in the 16 CSI divisions, 2 through 16, you'll be dealing with actually what you have to submit in every single section. So pretty much everything in your spec book has a submittal, and it's up to you to determine what that is and who has to provide that for you, which is why submittal logs are such a big deal, because your log is what you use to keep track of of everything, right? So within every section, there might be one submittal, there might be 50 submittals, and you have to look through your spec book to make sure that we are providing information on the correct items, and we're providing enough submittals and not providing unnecessary submittals. So we create a log, and we submit that log to the architect and engineers to make sure that we've captured everything that they were intending us to. Fair warning, oftentimes the spec books are heavily copy and pasted. So what you end up getting is a lot of information that's in there that says it's required for submittals that aren't actually required, and at the same time, some sections that don't say anything that are missing some. So this is why the submittal process is really important, where the submittal log process is important to create it, send it out, make sure it gets approved so that everything that you have on that log is understood from all parties involved, and then your subcontractors know what they have to submit and how they have to designate their submittals. So just a quick example of what one looks like. This one has a submittal ID, which is basically the spec section, and then a number associated with that spec section. Here is the spec section right here. This one is a description of what that part is. So these are Beltline Boulevard metal panels, West 21 First Street metal panels. So the different metal panel project, obviously, different location, different products. What type of submittal we have. So we'll go through that in a little while, but that's a lot of shop drawings, a lot of product data. Product data is your primary one that pretty much everything needs, right? We'll have samples, we'll have other things like that too. The originator is the company that is supposed to be sending those out. The originator contract is the person who's responsible for all those. And then the date received is, so this is just a little snippet of it, obviously, but there's a lot more to it than what we're showing. There's probably another 10 to 15 columns that you have to create to make sure that, because the dates are such a big deal when it comes to submittal logs. So the reason why they're so important is because they do hold everybody accountable. The contractor is the person who manages the entire process, right? But we have to hold the subs accountable for getting us the submittals on the dates that they're required. We have to hold the AEs accountable for the dates that they have to get stuff back to us. We have to hold ourselves accountable for actually reviewing the submittals and making sure we have a thorough process. Hold the owners accountable also for things like color selections and whatever else they might have for requirements in there for the submittal process on their end. Normally what we do is we make sure that we bind a subcontractor to a specific date. The way I've done it in the past is a generic contract requirement would be 2 weeks from date of signed contract is when I would have subcontractors required to submit all their submittals. Now that's not generally reasonable for a lot of subs. Some of them it's very easy, like masonry is pretty easy. Some of the finished products are pretty easy, but a lot of times they're not even selected yet, depending on the project, right? Mechanical equipment though is not very easy, so those will take a while. Steel shop drawings, that kind of stuff will take a while. So just understanding that, it's good to set those dates, but then every individual subcontractor will probably have a different requirement, but then we have to get those dates in that log and make sure that we're good to go, because this will tie heavily into scheduling, which we'll talk about later in the further, in a different module. So here's just a couple of really most important dates. I've seen some logs have a couple different dates in this. Some of it's based on contract. So just make sure that you understand that we have to receive it from a sub, usually a sub, could be yourself or it could be someone else. We have to forward it to the AE. So in this process, we're going to go through a submittal review before we send it to the AE. We have a response from the AE. We have a date submitted to the owner. A lot of times, depending on what the product is, response from the owner, return from the AE, and then we have to have an overdue. Make sure that we understand that if it's coming back late, that's not a schedule issue on our end. It's someone else's issue, and we have to hold people accountable for that. And then date forwarded to the originator. So make sure that they get their responses back, and they can't order anything, they can't install anything until they get approved submittals. Let's see here. Going through some of the submittal process, basically, obviously we have a spec book that specifies what products there are, right? Maybe it's a manufacturer, maybe it's just general requirements. But after we get the award to a subcontractor, they will then have time to go out and finalize their number with their own vendors. to make sure that they can meet all the requirements, to make sure that they can, sometimes they can try to cut costs out afterwards, as well. So once they do that, they can then quickly get some cut sheets if that's what they need, or product data. A lot of the product data is just readily available for different products, and they'll have to put together their own package and submit them to the contractor. And the contractor has to clarify with the subs how they need to title everything. They have to clarify, and if you don't do this, right, if you're not clarifying this process in pre-construction with your subcontractors, it's going to be very challenging to know what is being submitted and for what section. So making sure they understand what your submittal IDs are, what the title is, what type of products have to be submitted, and that's why the log is so important, and getting that up to the subcontractors so they understand what they are required to do. If they don't submit them correctly, send them back. Don't waste your time sitting there trying to do other people's work and trying to clarify things that you might not understand exactly what they're trying to do. So heading down here, once the submittal is sent in properly, you're gonna have to take a look at your log, mark it up, make sure that we have a date that we have it submitted, right? And then we're gonna have to pull up the appropriate spec section. So what you have to do is you have to look side by side with the submittal and the spec section and kind of walk through it. This is where it gets challenging because obviously every single piece of product information that you get in the submittal is going to be laid out differently, and some of those things might not exactly meet spec requirements. So it's up to you to review and see what does meet and what doesn't necessarily meet, and make some notes before you submit. One of the one of the biggest challenges that we've run into is, especially early, PEs that are early off in their career, they don't really know what they're looking for, so they just check that they reviewed it and send it on without actually taking a look at it. And that's not a very good thing, because sometimes there's products that are not even remotely close. So it's really important to take a look. You don't necessarily have to get it right because there's a lot of interpretation, but you do need to look through, see whatever information that the spec requires, see what products that you have against it, and just try to find all the data you can, mark it up, and make those comments, and then send it forward. That will indicate obviously that you've taken a look at it and it meets to some general standard. And then you push it back to the architects and engineers to make sure that it meets as their intention. So looking in, some sections are very complicated, right? So some things are way out of our expertise level, right? So we have specific mechanical engineers that look at mechanical things, and electrical engineers that look at electrical things, and structural engineers, right? So those are not things that necessarily you're expected as a contractor to confirm they meet all the intended design requirements, but it is important. There's still some information in there that you can look through and just be like, yep, this is the right product. At least we can check it off on the submittal log, and we have some general data we can go on to say, this generally looks like it's correct, but there's a lot of maybe calculations involved that's not your, it's kind of out of your realm of liability. So there are some things like that, obviously, that you'll always just kind of pass through, but you should still have a review of each item. So the requirements for what your actions are should be listed in your submittal sections of your general requirements. Division 1, generally we have something like this where it says reviewed with no exceptions noted. That means it's the exact product, all the things line up exactly. You just check that box on your submittal stamp and you send it on, right? Most of the time you're going to deal with reviewed as noted. That's obviously the most common. That's where you have the product seems to meet quite well. There may be a couple things that don't look like they necessarily meet or are very close, or you need confirmation, so you make little markups, check that box, you send it on. Revise and resubmit is when you have basically this product doesn't meet the spec. Maybe they submitted the wrong product, maybe they're trying to go for a substitution which didn't get approved and they're trying to submit on it anyways. There's a lot of different things that could come into play. And then rejected is it's not listed, does not meet the spec, submitted for the wrong use. That happens quite often too, right? Where someone submits it, labels it incorrectly. We're going to reject that because that's not what we're submitting for. Very important to understand, and it's clear on the log, because that sends that back to the subs and they have to get you new information quickly. Sometimes there's no action required. That's where you have just informative information, informative data that's coming in. A lot of times it's only needed for some sort of supplemental information that is requested from the architect, and then you just forward on. There's no action required. Different submittal types. We have product data. That's most common. Almost everything in your spec book requires product data. and that just lists all the specific information of that product. Samples are very common, obviously, for like finished products where you're trying to figure out color and patterns and textures and stuff like that, and you need hard samples of those things. And that's really a lot of times you'll see like what we call a sample board that gets submitted. Shop drawings are more specific for things like structural, mechanical items, millwork items, different things that have a lot more thorough, detailed assembly, because the architects and engineers will create their design based on sort of a generic design. They won't add all the specific details into everything, and that's where it's up to the contractor doing the work or the subcontractor building the thing or fabricating it that has to do all the very intricate, fine-tuned details. So those are really important, obviously, for actual install. This is where it gets a little more challenging as far as reviewing submittals of what you have to look at with shop drawings, because those are more specific for engineers to take a look at. There's also a lot of times safety data sheets where we have any kind of hazardous things, quality assurance where you're talking about installation qualifications a lot of times, right? Sometimes you need certifications for installers for different things. Sometimes there's calculations and methods that are required within your submittals. Different types as well. You might get some cut sheets or working drawings. Sometimes you need some schedules based on what the item is. Again, this is all sort of generic. Every project is a little bit different, so you'll just have to make sure you learn how to review the specs properly. Then a transmittal is a sheet that's basically a cover sheet that's sent along with your submittals, or any kind of construction document, really. They're just heavily involved with submittals that explain or that summarize what is the intent of the document you're submitting, what's all involved with the document that you're submitting. So often what you'll see is a transmittal sheet that is the cover sheet that might have like 5 or 6 submittal packages along with it. So that transmittal will explain, just briefly summarize, especially from the submittal log, what items you're submitting and to who. So impacts of submittals, obviously very big deal, because when it comes to construction, the three legs of the construction pyramid are time, money, and quality. And your submittals have a big hand in all 3 of those things. So it's a time-consuming activity. If you get it wrong, it adds more time. It throws off schedule. It throws off deliveries. It throws off installs, right? Delays the next person, next person, next person. So you have to make sure that your submittal process is done efficiently and effectively, right? All that stuff equals more money lost, right? If you do the submittals incorrectly or you submit the wrong product incorrectly, that's time, which equals money. Sometimes I've seen it where subcontractors submit one thing, come to install something else. Well, I've seen it because they want to cut costs, right, and try to slide something past you. I've seen it because it's just a mistake, right? But that's a delay in time in your project, and that's ultimately going to cost you more money. And then obviously the quality impact, because what you're doing here is a quality control check. And if you can do the quality control check better up front, right, you're investing that time up front in your project, you will save time and money and quality later. So really important that you get this right. Really important that you heavily focus on it and get it done. It's quite honestly a very daunting process. It's not too fun, but it is a great way to learn, and it's a great thing that you have to, if you learn very well, it sets you up for a lot more success during the project because you have a lot less headaches. So I think that's all I got for this one. Let's see, like I told you, I'm going to jump back in. I'll make a different video for you so you can kind of check out some of the practice activities in creating a submittal log, getting into the assignment a little bit and understanding what you have to do. And yeah, that should be about it. You also have your discussion post and your submittal quiz. So there's different questions obviously on there based on some of these resources, based on the PowerPoint. So make sure you take a look through all of this stuff, and I will send another video out to get you going on the assignment and practice stuff.